Untitled Chapter. We're continuing our study in the Ten Commandments. Today we look at the 8th commandment. And the title of this morning's message, Help for Keeping Stuff in Perspective. You know, you probably shouldn't have been following the car so closely. Not on Main Street at the traffic light at 6:30 on a Friday evening before the start of the home football game. Maybe they had a brake light out. It's hard to tell. It happens so quickly. But one minute you're tootling along thinking about the Vikings, and the next moment you're watching the BMW trademark race toward your windshield. Crunch. Fortunately, no one is hurt. In fact, the guy you just hit jumps out of his car. He looks at his trunk lid. He looks at you and he yells, "You hit me!" Well, no, not really. Your car hit his car, but it's probably not the right time to explain that to him. But his words do tell us something. We often treat some of our possessions as an extension of ourselves. It's true. If I visit your home, you might show me some stuff. And what you possess sometimes is a way of sharing who you are. Also, if I were to take that stuff away, it wouldn't injure you, not physically, but it would probably touch you deep down. It would hurt you as a person. Now, we don't have to be consumed by materialism to be affected by possessions. That's one of the hazards of ownership. You and I live in a country that presents that hazard more strongly than any other country. In fact, it was Jesus who said, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." We know all about the pitfalls of ownership, the temptation of stuff, because we live right in the middle of it. Now, some have attempted to argue that the model of the early church was that of a commune, that everyone was to have equal ownership, a kind of early form of communism. And they try to support such an idea from passages like Acts 4. In 44 to 45, it says, all the believers were together and had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods they gave to anyone as he had need. Or maybe in Acts 4, 34 to 35, where it says, there were no needy persons among them. For from time to time, those who owned lands or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone as they had need. But I notice as I look at these passages and others that there was still such a thing as ownership. In fact, Peter even said to a couple who sold their property in Acts chapter 5, "Didn't it belong to you before it was sold? And after it was sold, wasn't the money at your disposal?" You see, ownership is not a bad thing. It's also called stewardship. We can say we own things, and that's not a problem, as long as we understand that what we're saying is we are stewards of what God has entrusted to us. But I want you to understand, you can see this in your study guide, there are two ways to own. One is that you own the things God grants to you, and that's okay. We recognize that this is just a temporary grant from the Lord. And just the same, we recognize that we have a God-given privilege of calling some things mine. And there's a second way to own things, and that is that things own you. And that's the bigger issue you and I are going to look at this morning. When I steal, I don't just possess something that should belong to someone else. Something possesses me. And that's why God issues this 8th commandment that we're going to look into this morning. Exodus 20, verse 15, very simply says, "You shall not steal." Well, it's time to learn the new finger exercise for the 8th commandment. Okay? We're going to talk about the 8th commandment. We use 4 fingers on one hand and 4 fingers on the other. I'm going to use the one hand to kind of snatch the other fingers, as in, do not steal. Okay? Let's go through all 10 and all 8, okay? First commandment, one God, no other God. Second commandment, 2 fingers, bow down, no idols. Third commandment, fingers over the mouth, do not, help me, don't say the Lord's name in vain. Fourth commandment, some of your favorite one, Sabbath rest. Fifth commandment, honor parents, placing the 5 fingers over your heart. Sixth commandment, do not murder. Seventh commandment, no adultery. And the eighth commandment, do not steal. I'm committed to this, and I'm believing that someday down the road, someone's going to ask you, what's the sixth commandment? And you're going to go, do not murder. Just like that, you're going to remember. Great way to learn the 10 Commandments. Now, as with the other 7 commandments, it's important to understand that God isn't out to spoil our lives. He's given us here a principle. We need to remain free and unspoiled. So there's a few things I want us to look at. And as we look at the commands and not steal, I want to suggest that there are figuratively 100 ways to steal. Story is told of a woman who went shopping with her grandchildren. As the day drew to an end, the woman and her grandchildren were hurrying to get into the car when 4-year-old Jason said that his little sister Susie had something in her pocket. He reached in and he pulled out this new, shiny red beret. Well, Grandma was tired, but she knew it was important for Susie to put the item back where she found it, and they did just that. And then later, the grocery store clerk asked, I have a sucker here for good kids. Have you been good kids? And Jason said, I've been very good, but my sister just robbed the store. Maybe you've never been arrested for stealing, and that's okay. And I think I can still establish relevance for all of us here today. In fact, in the book, The Day America Told the Truth, it was reported that 74% of Americans say they will steal from those who won't miss it. Remember that old song, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover? Some of you may not remember that. Others of us will. One writer said that there are over 100 synonyms for the act of stealing. Bag, boot, embezzle, filch, knock off, lift, misappropriate, palm, pilfer, pinch, pocket, purloin, rob, snatch, steal, thieve, whip. Point is, there's just a lot of ways to steal. For instance, one of the things is there's taking tangible things away from someone else. Like maybe when you were a little kid and you made off with a piece of candy from a store or baseball cards. It belonged to someone else and you took it. It was that simple. Or take it up another notch and there could be a person working in a financial institution and moving funds electronically from an account at one institution to a private account in another. That's stealing. We all pretty well understand that. In fact, in Deuteronomy 25, we read, do not have 2 differing weights in your bag, one heavy, one light. Do not have 2 differing measures in your house, one large, one small. You must have accurate and honest weights and measures, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. For the Lord your God detests anyone who does these things, anyone who deals dishonestly. Anyone who used scales for trading would understand this. And maybe a more recent equivalent would be the butcher who puts his thumb on the scales when he weighs your meat. Read that again. It says, God detests anyone who does these things. Anyone who deals dishonestly. Another way of stealing is withholding what is due. Like when a boss promises wages, or an employee promises hours, or a student promises to repay a student loan. There's a commitment to be kept. To break it is stealing and violating the 8th commandment. Beyond all these, there are the intangible ways that we steal. We can steal someone else's ideas by violating copyrights or patents or copying their answers off a test. That's a form of stealing. You can steal a person's opportunities by unfairly denying them a job or housing or education. You can steal a person's liberty by imposing incorrect legalistic rules on them. You can steal a person's well-being by over-accumulating things for yourself rather than sharing. Every one of these things, while you may not be able to draw a picture of it or lock it in a vault, is something that can be stolen from someone else. And it doesn't stop there. You can rob God, too. You ask a person, rob God? Well, that's what it says in Malachi 3. It says, will a man rob God? Yet you rob me. But you ask, how do we rob you? In tithes and offerings. You are under a curse, the whole nation of you, because you are robbing me. And through his prophet, God goes on to explain that the people are withholding their tithes from him, and that according to God, that's robbery. Also, back in Malachi 1, God says he's being robbed of the honor that's due his name. because of the way the people are treating their sacrifices to him. And in more than one place, God complains that his name is robbed of credibility in the eyes of ungodly people because his own people are living lives that are lacking character. Like I said, there are 100 ways to steal, and I don't have the time to list every one of them, but I think you get the idea. What we do have time for, though, is to test whether or not this topic is relevant. So, on your bulletin, on a piece of paper, hopefully it's a short list, but I want you to go ahead and list all the things you've stolen. This won't be shared with anybody else. Books or CDs you've never returned, tools you've never returned, copyrights you violated, money borrowed but have not returned, items you sold without letting someone know that was a problem with it, people you unfairly held back, test answers you got off someone else's paper, hours you were paid for but didn't work, incorrect charges that were in your favor and you didn't correct them. Go ahead, make a list. And if you're able to write down any of those things, then this is for you a relevant subject today. There must be 100 ways to steal, and the odds are that you and I have managed to pull off a few of them at least. I've tucked that little piece of paper away. Don't let your neighbors see what that list is. Because I want us to now look at 2 ways to look at stuff. I want us to shift now from 100 ways to steal to 2 ways to look at stuff. Now please understand, when I say stuff, I'm using a highly technical term for material possessions. The things of the world. Stuff. Now why is it that people steal stuff? Well, some because they want the thrill of getting away with it. Some because it attracts friends. Some for the security. Some for instant happiness. And there may be a lot of reasons we do it, but I think the reason most people steal is because they haven't kept stuff in perspective. So let me give you some even biblical examples of this. For instance, the very first sin. I think Adam and Eve's sin really was a sin of theft. They were told to not take something and they took it. And it involved this incorrect perspective on stuff. Eve saw that it was good for food and pleasing to the eye and desirable in gaining wisdom. And she, and presumably Adam, weighed it out. They decided that the value of having those things was greater than the value of their relationship with God and not dying. There's another example in the very first sin recorded during the conquest of the Promised Land. It was theft. Everyone in Jericho was supposed to be destroyed, but Achan was one soldier who had a skewed perspective on stuff. He knew about the rules, but he said in Joshua 7:21, "When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and I took them." Achan decided that the value of that stuff was greater than the value of being obedient. And as a result, several people died, including Achan and his whole family. But what Achan didn't realize was that God was going to allow the soldiers to take over all the plunder from the very next city they conquered. And then there's the story of the rich young ruler who spoke with Jesus. He was interested in spiritual things. He wondered what it took to have eternal life. And Jesus said to him in Luke 18, "You still lack one thing. Sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." And when Jesus told this man that his possessions were in the way between him and Jesus, he dropped the subject and left. You see, for him, stuff was more important than his relationship with Jesus. And story after story shows us examples of people who have the wrong perspective on stuff. But when I put on godly character, when I put on Jesus, it gives me a different perspective. It gives me 2 new ways to look at stuff. First, I don't want to place my desire for stuff ahead of the well-being of others. I don't want to steal. Lily Tomlin is quoted as saying, "The trouble of the rat race is that even if you win, you're still a rat." When I care more about stuff, I want it at the expense of others. To me, it's worth the trouble or hurt of a cause of. I want it more than I care about them, so if necessary, I even want to steal. But when Jesus enters the scene, that changes. It changed the life of this squirrely little tax collector named Zacchaeus. Jesus came to his house for lunch, and in a short time, that Jewish turncoat, who made a living by overcharging everyone for their taxes, took on this new perspective. And I don't know what Jesus said during those few hours together. I don't know what was so convicted to Zacchaeus, but I do know that he was convinced he had stolen, and I know it because of what he did. It says in Luke 19, Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. And Jesus said to him, today, salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. And one of the best evidences of this change is the desire to make restitution. It was an Old Testament idea, and it was God's idea. He commanded in various cases that when something was stolen, it had to be returned and then with some. For instance, Exodus 22:1 says, if a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he must pay back 5 head of cattle for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep. When I changed from being a thief to being someone who's trying to amend for my wrongs, I demonstrate that a change has taken place in me. That's what Zacchaeus did, and that's how I know Jesus had impacted his life. I don't want to steal. The second way to look at stuff has to do with the way I think of God. I don't need to place my desire for stuff ahead of my trust in God to provide. I don't need to steal. In Hebrews 13:5, God gives a command that also the help we need to keep the command. He says, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. God doesn't just tell us to live without being caught up in material things. He also reassures us that He's going to take care of us in this life. When Jesus enters the scene and we're counting on Him to keep His promises to us, we won't feel the need to steal. Jesus said in Matthew 6, look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to his life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the lilies of the field grow? They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothed the grass of the field which is here today, and tomorrow is thrown in the fire, will He not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans went after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. And if the thing that motivates me to steal is a concern, that I won't have enough of my own, God says to me, you can stop worrying about that right now. If I feel like I have to fudge on my income taxes or expense reports at work, God says to me, you don't need to do that. Focus on God's kingdom and God's righteousness first, and all these things will be cared for you. So would you like to be able to tell if Jesus has really entered the scene of your perspective on stuff this morning? Would you like to put it to a test? Take that little list of things that you've hidden away and look at them and return them. Return the borrowed book, the forgotten tool, the CD, refill the supply bin, explain why, apologize, say that you're trying to right a wrong. I dare you to make it right. And we might be amazed by what will happen. In fact, in the Belfast revival of 1922 and 23, converted shipyard workers brought back tools and equipment they had stolen over time. So much came back in one place that they had to build another storage shed just to keep the stuff that they brought back. Now, the third thing I want to share with you this morning are the 3 self-installed theft control devices. There was a sign in a bookstore at the university explaining the check cashing procedure. It said, the honor system was used for checks under $35. All the cashier needed to see was the student's ID card, driver's license, social security card, birth certificate, fingerprints disclosure, disclosure of identifying scars and tattoos, signature of the department head, and proof of citizenship. That's all. There are some locks that are made to keep things secure. You know, they're the kind that take bolt cutters or dynamite to break. And then there are the locks that wouldn't keep a well-seasoned thief out. They're the locks that are there to keep honest people honest. And for many people, that makes the difference, though. Sometimes just a deterrent is all we need to help us keep out of trouble. So what I want to hand over to everyone this morning are 3 locks to help us in this area of life. And these are self-installed theft control devices. They're not foolproof, and they're up to you to use, but they are helps to make us people of character when it comes to the 8th commandment. The first one is practice thankfulness. The scriptures remind us in the midst of asking and being concerned about God's help to do that with an attitude of thankfulness. The fact is, being a thankful person is something that comes with practice. Someone has said envy is when you count your neighbor's blessings. And I want to suggest, at the risk of sounding trite or cliche-ish, that thankfulness happens when you count your own blessings. When was the last time you sat down and made a list of things for which you are thankful? When was the last time you determined to pray and in your prayer do nothing but thank God for what you have? When was the last time you decided that you would go through an entire day without one word of complaint, but rather with words of thanks to everyone you met for everything you could think of? You see, deliberately practicing the art of thankfulness will be a safeguard against the temptation to steal. I heard the story attributed to Matthew Henry, an English writer of a well-known Bible commentary. It seems he was robbed one day in the street. And that day, in his journal, he made this entry. Let me be thankful first because I was never robbed before. Second, because although they took my wallet, they did not take my life. Third, because although they took my all, it was not much. And fourth, because it was I who was robbed, and not I who robbed. The second advice is to practice sharing. It's hard to be involved in giving to others and stealing at the same time. They don't go together, unless maybe you're robbing them. It's interesting to me the motivation that Paul gives for working. He says in Ephesians 4, he who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with his own hands, that he may have something to share with those in need. And this goes hand in hand with having the right perspective on stuff. Is it really your stuff? Or is it God's stuff that he entrusts to your care? Proverbs 19 says, he who is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward him for what he has done. Proverbs 11 says, a generous man will prosper. He who refreshes others will himself be refreshed. Do you believe it? Then you believe that by practice sharing, you'll have a device that will help you to not be one who steals. And then the third device is to practice trusting God. I've been a part of a group, maybe you've been a part of a group like this, where they attempt to teach trust by having you turn around, close your eyes, fall backwards, hoping to be caught by those who are behind you. It's not always the easiest thing to do, but the more you practice it, the more you realize that you can count on whoever's behind you, the easier it becomes. It takes practice. And that's the point of doing this simple act, to teach trust. When was the last time you practiced trusting God? When was the last time you did a free fall into his arms and expected him to catch you? I challenge you, practice trusting God. Trust God to bless your acts of restitution. Trust God to provide for you in cases where you're tempted to steal. Trust God to keep his promise to never leave or forsake you. Let me finish my story about my life of crime that I wrote about in the opening of our bulletin. In 1993, my father sent me a newspaper article, clipped from the Toledo Blade, about Lloyd Otto, the owner of Otto's Variety Store in Toledo, Ohio. That's where my crime took place. After being in business over 75 years, the newspaper article shared with us that Otto's Variety Store was going to close their doors due to their inability to keep up with the big box stores that were competing with them. Lloyd was a second-generation owner, and the article talked about how much he enjoyed being a part of the community he grew up in and to serve it with his family store. After I read the article, I wrote Mr. Otto a letter and told him my life story about coming to Christ and becoming a minister. I told him that I didn't know if he remembered the incident of my shoplifting, but I told him that it was perhaps one of the most defining moments in my life, and that it even helped soften my attitude and perhaps even make myself open to responding positively to the gospel. I told him that I honored his ban and that I had never stepped foot in the store again after that incident, and I wished him luck in the next step in his life. About a week later, I got a note back from Mr. Otto. In fact, he told me that he did in fact remember who I was. Remember, his daughter was my sister's best friend. And he was pleased to know that I was a minister and that my life was so positive. And he then told me he was lifting the lifetime ban and that I was welcome in his store anytime. I'd been pardoned. I remember picking up the phone to call my dad, and I told him Mr. Otto said to me that I could go back to the store. And my dad, and only the way that my dad could, said to me, well, Tim, of course he's going to let you back in the store. He's closing the business. You can't take anything from the store. Thanks, Dad. In Matthew 16, Jesus said, "What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world, yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul?" The answer? Nothing. No good. There's nothing in this world that a person can gain by stealing or by honest labor that is of greater value than his soul. William Wadsworth wrote this: "The world is too much with us, late and soon. Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours, we have given our hearts away, a sordid boon." I've said this before, and you've heard it again. There are no funeral hearses with U-Haul trailers behind them. And yet all around us are people who live their entire lives for the sake of things, even stealing if necessary. We need the perspective that comes when Jesus enters the scene. We need to have the blessing that comes from seeking first His kingdom and His righteousness. Because then it says, "And all these things shall be added unto you." Let's pray. Father, we look at these commandments and we may think they're irrelevant. But are they? You know, our nature is sin. And one of the things that the Ten Commandments teaches us is that we are not perfect. That we do fall short of your glory. But thankfully, you've made a way for us to make it right. You've given us your Son, Jesus. And in Him we've learned to trust. We've learned to be obedient. We've learned to understand that in our imperfections, Jesus will see us through. And He made a way so that we could live forever with you. I thank you for what you taught Moses, who then taught the world, teaching us. Give us your strength day in and day out to be obedient to the way you want us to live. In Christ's name we pray this.